Welcome back. Welcome to the second panel of our workshop this morning. And the title of the second panel is Air, Wind, Water, Sound, and Space in Ecological Crisis. I'm Hao Choi. So this panel consists of 4 papers. And first, let me introduce our first presenter at this panel, Winnie Yi. Okay. Winnie Yi is Senior Lecturer and Program Coordinator of the MA Master's Program in Literary and Cultural Studies at the University of Hong Kong. Her research interests are eco-criticism, Hong Kong culture, contemporary Chinese literature and film, and independent cinema. She is currently working on a book project exploring the relationship between eco-poetics and Chinese literature and independent film scene. Her works have appeared in Cultural Studies, Prism, Journal of Asian Cinema, Communication, and the Public, among others. And the title of Professor Yi's presentation today is Breathing and Singing in the Air. Some preliminary thoughts on literary and visual narratives of air in post-socialist China. So let's welcome Dr. Yi.
I hope everyone can see it clearly.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So good morning, from Hong Kong. Very happy, to be here participating in this wonderful conference. So this morning, what I'm going to look at, it's air, and in particular, air pollution in the context, of China. So I will start, by sharing, a bit about what I think about air, and how air, is generally perceived, and also conceived in terms, of its pollutions, and also how it's depicted, in different types, of creative works. Air has received increasing attention as a topic of concern and as the unifying medium of breath. The anthropologist Tim Choi points out that breath has rich cultural connotations, and I cite it here. Breathing is at once corporal and meaningful, routine and affecting. It glides between measure and evocation. End quote. Adopting breathing as an organizing principle, Choi proposes that the act of breathing brings together particular moments and draws attention to the conditions of their emergence. Breathing is an act that signifies togetherness, but in China, I think it has also been affected by the rise of industry. China is now undergoing a respiratory reckoning. Focusing on breathing as an act and as a harbinger, this presentation charts the trajectory of depicting and responding to the serious air pollution in post-socialist China. And then Cai Jing's Under the Dome, would be one reference work, which I would argue that it provides a scientific perspective on the dire situations of smog in China. So smog, is the result of the severe air pollution in post-socialist China, where ongoing urban development and coal consumption have destroyed not only human lives, but also the environment as a whole. Breathing, is a corporal engagement with air that is natural, and necessary. But then I want to point you to a different kind of engagement. A more complex engagement with air, singing, mobilizes different senses and varied, emotions. In the Encyclopedia Britannica entry describes singing as the following: the productions of musical tones by means of the human voice. That singing, is distinguished from speaking by the manner in which the breath, is expanded, to vibrate the vocal cords. Singing requires more breath, the louder, higher, and longer one sings. It also requires that the emission of breath be more firmly controlled, end quote. I think in this presentation, I suggest there are 2 methods, of tracking smog and analyzing its impact. One arises from breathing, which comes naturally, and the other arises from singing, which is conscious and depends on the constructions of relationship. In Jia Jiangke's short film, Smog Journeys, also produced in 2015, commissioned by Greenpeace Asia, singing is portrayed as a way to react to the devastating effects of smog. And in Chen Qiufan's short story, The Smog Society, also produced around the same time. As well, singing is an indicator of the perils of urbanization, particularly the destruction of environment and its human consequences. Singing, you know, is a way of registering these effects. And then the smog society in particular shows that a failure to do so will lead to irreversible trauma. Smog is not just an external object that can be submitted to scientific investigation. It is actually a condition that is a continuous flux, provoking a range of affective responses. Only when we recognize the malleability of air and its endless modifications can we understand the nuances of the relationship between human beings and air. So this presentation contains some of my preliminary thoughts on works that depict smog, a critical indicator of air pollution that has penetrated every experience of Chinese people since urbanization becomes a priority. It references recent debates on our understanding of air as an external object, a subjective projection, and a medium that connects interior and exterior. I also aim to show how our assumptions about air are challenged, you know, in some of these texts that I have selected to analyze. Referencing both breathing, which is usually an unconscious, passive, and universal practice, and singing, which is a conscious use of breathing that is effective and emotive, I tend to examine the materiality of air in selected texts. And I want to highlight that this presentation employs a new materialist methodology using the concept of storied matter, which assumes agency in all things. Opperman, has described story matter as I have citation here, an ontological performance of the world in its ongoing articulation, end quote. It focuses on evolution and dissolution and opens up possibilities for non-hierarchical, cross-scale ecological engagements and interactions between people and other entities and forces. Donald Haraway also observed in a similar way that we need stories and theories that are just big enough to gather up the complexities and keep the edges open and greedy for surprising new and old connections, end quote. Story matter, answers the need, and as it promotes narratives that rely on the agency of matter and can therefore counter accusations of anthropocentrism and even anthropomorphism. Story matter, in other words, is a way of reimagining, the collective story that can take into multiple takes into account multiple becomings and conflicting relations. It also enables us to transcend our contemporary situations and the current knowledge system that perpetuate human-centered approaches. The polluted smog that often engulfs China, for example, can become that kind of focus rather than just the background of our attention. And the three works discussed in this short presentation represent two approaches to understand smog in China. While Caijing's Under the Dome is a human-centered story, I would argue that smog journeys and the smog society portrays the smog as closer to an agent that shapes and changes human beings. Just a very brief introduction to some of the discussions that is about air that I think would be useful to help us to understand the general picture. So in general, air is considered as an external object which can be analyzed with the help of scientific data. Air is tangible when it is translated into chemical atoms and the data sources that can be recorded, analyzed, and charted. With satellite images in particular and meta data collections technology, what is invisible becomes visible and objectified. And the decision to treat air as matter that can only be known via science has discouraged a more immediate engagement with it on the part of the layman. Air is also understood as a condition of subject formation. To critics such as Ben Anderson, there's a quote here: affective atmospheres are a class of experience that occurred before and alongside the formation of subjectivity across human and non-human materialities and in between subject-object distinctions, end quote. Atmospheres require completion by the subjects that apprehend them, and they are always in the process of emerging and transforming. Anderson maintains that atmospheres are connected to a form of enclosure and also forms of circulations. In order to undertake a historical and cultural epistemology of air, we must consider it not only as an environment, but as an intrinsic element of human civilization and phenomenological experience. The Chinese concept of air qi also is read as an interface that exists in an in-between state, which is used to describe the channels through which the private and public spaces are connected in some discussions. I will quickly also point you to Eva Horn, very, important critique, on air, which, she describes air as a medium, a medium in that which is in the middle between two entities. That she argues that treating air as a medium is a methodological approach that facilitates a broadened understanding and appreciation of the role of air that plays in conditioning and articulating different forms of life. She also maintains that if air acts as a medium, both binding the living to a place and dislocating life by its flows, emanation, and forces, an explication of these opposed yet complementary characteristics of air's activities would mean developing a sensorium, affective engagement for the places and the fluxes in which we are always, caught up. So I think Horn encourages us to think of being in the air rather than viewing air just as an object of scientific analysis that is, well, decipherable. Being in the air blurs the boundaries between organisms and environment and focuses on the exchanges. The way we breathe it, feel it on the skin when we sweat and shiver, notice the smells and changes, of the season. So in that way, air is always constant and new. I would just then go on to the texture analysis, of the text that I have selected. Air is always, the well-known news anchor and journalist Cai Jing produced the documentary Under the Dome, which is widely known and circulated, and viewed, to share her experience of having a daughter born with a heart condition that was likely caused by the poor air quality that resulted from China's reckless urban development. Her stories of the effects of air pollution on human lives are evidences of the systemic failure to enforce environmental measures in China. Cai's documentary presents the slow violence of environmental damage, revealing injuries that mutate over time and across the nation. It is a documentary about breathing and the consequences of breathing in pollution. After presenting the scientific data on the damage smog can do to one's health, Cai Jing emphasizes that China must follow the Western model to exert some control over the pollution. Citing scientific data and consulting experts in various fields, Under the Dome exposes the severity of air pollution, destructive effects on the body, etc. It's difficult to breathe freely and safely in China, as the documentary suggests. The country's commitment to coal extraction has disastrous consequences, which must be controlled. And Cai Jing's documentary relies on science to enable and to provide a reliable and objective understanding of smog. She also sees herself as a translator, who helps to render this difficult scientific information inhalable for the layman. I think for the audience, who has watched, this documentary before, you probably recall that, she often said that, it's difficult, to understand these data, and then she will use, animation and other kind of aids, to help people to understand. Such a separation between air pollution as an object and that is scientifically, analyzed, and pollution as a personal experience is actually quite artificial, as artificial, as the kind of short reverse shot, that is being deployed in the documentary. So in response, to Under the Dome, eco-critic Jia Ruzhang points out that air is understood only in accordance with the terms of Western science, in that documentary. It is described using chemical terminology. And Zhang, further maintains that, a citation here, under smog's impending threat, to public health, the language used to express air, life's primary element, has authorized highly scienticized language to engender a sense of authority and urgency, end of quote. Zhang, complains, that Cai Jing employs highly specialized atmospheric data to justify her surrender, to scientific authority. And to the critic, it is important to upset this modern and Anthropocene and master narratives by drawing attention to their suppression of cultural differences. And then, she is citing, Ruth Rogaski's discussions of air qi to highlight the importance of recognizing that China's pre-modern idea of qi actually was transformed into chemical components, helping ontologize science. And also that the birth, of the modern Chinese word air is actually a de facto a Chinese, a Christian mission project. So for me, while Zhang's critique, of the repression of Chinese culture and the manipulation of the Chinese view of smog is apt, I think a more important question is that smog is actually essentialized, in the documentary. Air is not shown to be a malleable element that reconstitutes itself according to cultural perspectives. And of course, it is cultural perspectives themselves that have encouraged this over-dependence on science and the transformation of air into a set of laws and computable mechanism, which can be used to model its past, current, and future behavior. But then the question is whether such a scientific gaze encourages a comprehensive understanding of air's association with places and people. And then in Cai Jing's documentary, smog, is objectified. It is an identifiable problem that requires a scientific, solutions. So the innocent face, of the little girl suffering from the effects of pollution, whom Cai Jing interviews, is mirrored in the innocent faces, of the audiences inside the auditorium, of the lecture, who seems, to be just becoming aware of the severity, of the problem. So Zhang argues that Cai Jing's documentary renders, the audience passive witnesses to an objectified problem, rather than engage them, in a relationship, with air more closely. Although breathing, is a universal practice, and threats to breathing unites all creatures in a shared danger. Zhang Jiaru insists that it is also culturally tempered. So she points out that the discourse of breathing can also be variously shaped and internalized. That attempts to naturalize, it is actually quite dangerous. I just cite you here that there is actually another poem written by the Chinese surgeon Zhao Xiaogang, I Long to be King, a bit later in 2017, that actually expands and replicates that kind of intrusiveness and invisibility of air pollution that destroys the human body. I'm going to just skip a bit here, but then think this is useful for anyone who wants to go into this discourse a bit more. I quickly want to move on to another text that I am looking into, which is about Jia Zhangke's short film Smog Journeys, that is commissioned by the Greenpeace Asia. Now this is a 7-minute film that highlights the core indicators of safety and danger, be it visibility, contact, or emotional. The film depicts the cheerful faces of children, drawing the attention to the need for older generation to be held responsible for preserving the purity of the air. But then one thing that I want to draw your attention to is actually that while most of the film is without dialogue, the only diegetic sound is a group of school children singing in front of a piano. And that which the lyrics, evoke a blue sky reflected in a clear lake, a reminder of a space and time before, pollution. This is on YouTube, so I highly recommend you, to watch it. It's just 7 minutes. And then, that part about singing brings me, to Chen Qiufan's science fiction short story, The Smog Society. Now, the story does not attempt to provide answers to the problem of smog. Its setting is an unknown industrial society blanketed by smog. The protagonist, Lao Sun, is a solitary retiree who volunteers at a non-governmental organization, the Smog Society, where he monitors the quality of air. The story draws a connection between urbanization, labor, depression, and smog. The smog conditions not only cause damage to the environment, but also contribute to the dissolution of the family. Lao Sun's wife left him because the couple could not agree on when to conceive a child, or even if it were possible to raise a child where no space seemed to be free of smog. So the short story presents this a heavy space as a mirage that has vanished in a smog-ridden society. Now, singing is related to breathing, but in Chen Qiufan's short story, singing is a catalyst and symbol of various affective relations that is connected, to the conditions of air pollution. The choice of song and the decision to sing or not sing bring back memories and causes the characters to reevaluate their lives. Lao Sun's departed wife repeatedly asked him to sing, but he would not comply. The sentences, "I want to hear you sing," and "as soon, I would still want to hear you sing," are reiterated in the story and bring Lao Sun to tears. yeah, Howard, has the link, on the chat, thank you so much. The demands made on laborers like Lao Sun in the name of development inflict collateral damage on familial, relationship. Sun refuses to sing because singing is a waste of energy and that could be applied to work. The refusal leads to his wife's desertion. Only as a retired person can Sun recognize and lament the chances he has missed. Singing becomes an unbearable reminder of the irretrievable past and the lost relationships. Every day he looks through the windows of a local daycare, contemplating the lives of the children. And finally, he takes off his mask, he customarily wears, and starts singing old songs to them, reversing the dynamic so that he becomes the spectacle, not the children. The shift of positioning allows him to see things differently and also elsewhere. By replacing the protective mask with a clown mask, Lao Sun, at the end of the story, makes himself as a spectacle, for every passerby. And the old songs playing from his speakers causes eruptions of laughter that are direct engagements, with the air. The story ends like this. The melody, which was so cheerful that it verged on the absurd, pierced, the glass. Children began to move to the music, following the clown in his gymnastics, etc. The city in the story remains anonymous, implying that smog can be present anywhere. And there's also the suggestion that the smog is an outgrowth of psychological problem, as understood by Lao Sun after listening to how the government tried to manipulate the data. And he said, so smog is caused by how we feel. Now, this possibility of a psychological source called into question the scientific data Lao Sun collected as part of his hobby and job. And may not be an objective entity, but the product of subjective imagination, exposing the problems caused by an over-reliance on science and the government's use of science to maintain ideological control. The short story suggests that air is a manifestation of emotions. While data can be collected and tailored to serve a political agenda, the story undercuts the authority of scientific objectivism. The tangle of emotions, which includes that air moves, shakes, and shapes, human emotions. The status of air is continually, reconstituted, and renewed. The thickness of smog that is stressed, in the story reduces, visibility and blocks interactions and even, numbs emotions. The smog is a material element, that actually shapes the narrative and creates the mood. The numbness it agendas in laborers like Lao Sun causes them to lose the ability to engage emotionally and become caught up in a vicious cycle of work and depression. Lao Sun's ability to embrace feelings and sensation is released only when he ceases to be a cog in the wheel of urbanization and the object of the government's biopolitical control. And from a Marxist point of view, the laboring body cannot feel its connection to environmental deprivation. It is only when laborers are considered useless that they are able to assess, their sensibilities. I know my time is up, so I would just jump, to the conclusion. To conclude, this presentation, focuses on the free text and two different ways, to engage, with air, to reflect on these different discourses and possibilities in the context of post-socialist, China. Given that the problem will persist, we should consider the best way to address, it without falling into the traps of pure scientism or pure subjectivism. In order to ask the questions posed in Under the Dome, what is smog? What does it come from? How can we deal with it? I think we need to understand the ways in which our comprehension of smog has been culturally shaped. And Chen Qiufan's short story is sensitive to these new relations created by climate change and the rise of a labor force that participates in its destruction of the environment, cities, and family relationship. It shows how easy it is to manipulate the data and the discourse to serve the state's interests. Air becomes an indicator also of capitalistic control. To breathe freely and safely, to live fearlessly, and to sing joyfully are luxuries that we now view with nostalgia. So breathing and singing actually give us different ways of understanding the air in post-socialist China. And I think, it also provides us, new possibilities to appreciate the qualities of air and our mutual relationship with it through these texts that I've selected. Thank you so much. I will just stop here.